Hey, what's up, everyone? My name's Zack Olinger. In this podcast series, I talk about relationships. Now, I know, as a man, you may not want to talk about relationships, or you may even tell me that the relationship that you're in is already pretty good. But I'm going to invite you to consider this. Could you be a little bit more fulfilled in the relationship that you have? I would like to have you consider that there may be other ways to kind of see the conflicts that are truly just unnecessary that we all experience in a different light. And if you're open to receiving or just giving me a little bit of your time, then I look forward to my guests and I inspiring you to become a man that can have more freedom, less conflict, and more pleasure in their relationships. Thanks for joining me.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining me on another episode of the Real Zack Olinger. Today, my guest is Deidra Broxterman, who is a dating and love coach and founder of the Manifest Love Method, and she helps singles find love again. And today she's going to speak to us about how her relationship with her parents impacted and influenced other relationships throughout her life. So Deidra, thanks for being a guest, and I'll just turn it over to you.
I always imagined, being on a podcast at one point a couple years ago. So this is pretty amazing that I'm going to be on your podcast. Makes me very excited. But yeah, so when you talked about how you said that we wanted to talk about conflict and how we have conflict in our relationships, one of the first things that came to my mind was, all the conflict that I had in my relationships, being a dating and love coach, you're always facing a lot of conflict. Chances are the women I work with, they have a lot of conflict in their past and they don't want to have that conflict, that future conflict that led to a divorce in their future. So it's really, in order to connect with a lot of the women that I work with, it's a, part of that is sharing my story in terms of, how I overcame that and how I deal with conflict now and understanding conflict, because I think when you understand why conflict occurs, we can stop those patterns from continuing in our life, right? So we can find the root cause of that conflict, then we're able to and become aware of that. The biggest part is just becoming aware of where that conflict is coming from, because it's, when we're in our relationships, romantic relationships, we don't think that they have anything really to do with our parents or, our mom and our dad. It's like, what did they have to do with my romantic relationship or why I'm standing here fighting with you? I mean, think about all the crazy things you get in a fight, or conflict with in your relationships. Or my biggest thing, when I teaching in my group program is talking about choosing, the way that, conflict is just, it's almost like it's the cause, but the effect is like, first, we gain our identity from our parents and that identity of attachment styles. And then we go into gaining that idea of what love is. And then we choose partners based on what we think, love is, or whatever that case is subconsciously. And then it's conflict, right? Because then we realize, okay, well, maybe this person doesn't have the same idea as me. And then there's all this conflict in relationships. So it's just like that. It's that last effect. But there's so many other, there's so many other beginnings in that. I don't know if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things that I do. And I recently became more aware of where my conflict came from in my life. A year ago when I did a transformational coaching program with Jim Fortin, when I realized, well, I think I knew this prior. I knew that I had some issues from my childhood based on a lot of the fear that I had that developed with my mother and my father in terms of having that fear of abandonment, right? Because my dad was not somebody that was really present in my life, right? Mm-hmm. And then my mom, she had me when she was really young. So she was not in that stage of really being the mother that she is now. I mean, I think, for me being a mom, you grow into that. But when I was the first one born, she was still figuring out like how to be a mom and how to be there as a parent for us. And, she made mistakes, and that's what parents do. We're growing, and I mean, I'm a parent now and I make mistakes all the time. And I'm like, oh, wow, I shouldn't have done that. But, coming to that awareness in yourself and saying, okay, well, it's just, if you're fighting with your partner or spouse, because, I was married and I had a husband, and then I got divorced, and then I started dating again and getting into other relationships. And it wasn't until I started getting into those other relationships that I realized that I was the one that I had these patterns within myself, like not only with the men that I chose to be in relationships with, but which was a huge part in creating that conflict, right? Because I was choosing partners that were so different from me, and I was expecting us to get along. And I was like, but we're so different. Like, how could I ever, it's like, for example, I'll give you an example. My boyfriend, crazy story, but I wanted to marry this guy. He was literally, so this was a guy, my last two boyfriends basically lived in different countries. So one lived in France, they were international. One lived in France and one was from, Germany, and he lived in Austria. And, the cultural differences there are, they're so different, right? I mean, we're coming from different backgrounds and childhoods, and like, to imagine that you're going to have a peaceful reunion and not have any conflict in that. It was like, duh, of course, Deidra, like, you're choosing partners that are so different from you. And then you're wondering why you don't have the same values and value system. But it took me, going through, my own coaching and my own transformation and becoming aware, and my own transformation using subconscious programming, and really understanding this idea of like energy and mastering your personal power, to really understand how I was choosing partners and why I was having relationships so filled with conflict that led to breakups and divorce, right? But also seeing that pattern. So now it's like I'm going on a tangent, but the point I was trying to make, I think I was just saying that, when we have awareness, we can see, we can kind of see ourselves, outside of ourselves instead of in that emotion and conflict. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally does. Yeah, no, I definitely appreciate the, and well, first, thanks for sharing all of that for sure. And just the awareness piece definitely resonates with me. It's a very much a theme. I have started to mention it in like the other interviews that I've done for sure is, and what I love is that message is very perpetual, and it's the underlying like truth. Like, it seems to be a very principalistic, like universal thing where to really get into the relationships that you want to attract into one's life, or at least to like reduce conflict, it starts with yourself, right? To start looking at yourself. And so yeah, I think it does. I think it takes I think everybody that I've spoken to has said the same or something similar, where they've gone through some type of relationship experience and then they realized, like, hold on a second, like, I'm the common denominator, and what's going on like inside of me that is like bringing this out or attracting this like into my life. And I just I don't know, I find that fascinating, because I mean, obviously I've had my own experience around that kind of a thing. And
Right.
just to see so many people from so many different backgrounds, and like just their different variations and permutations of how these relationships showed up, the message remains the same. And so I love that particular piece. So yeah, I think awareness is yes, is key to all of that kind of stuff, because it just gives us there's a woman, Julia, who I was in a program. She was doing a free masterclass here recently, and I just have to give her credit because I love this saying that she said. She's, awareness can give us choice in the moment, and I just love that, because I'm like, that's so
Definitely.
true. Yeah, yeah. We may not choose it, we may have awareness and sometimes still not choose to like implement what our awareness gives us, but it gives us the choice in the moment.
Yeah, when you realize the power of choice, you're just like, oh my God, what kind of choices have I been making? And that was a huge realization for me, because I think prior to, me becoming more aware of myself and what I was bringing to the relationships myself, I was in a lot of like blame. Like I blamed like, oh, it wasn't me, it was my ex-husband. He was the one with the problem. My ex-boyfriends, their loss, it's their problem, not mine. And it's like, well, actually, it's nobody's fault, but you knew you need to, and that was a big realization that I need to start taking responsibility for the fact that I chose to be in those types of relationships, right? And I chose those men to be in relationships with. I think when we look at when I look at the industry, there's so much like blame on like, oh, the bad guys, there's bad guys out there, like when you're out in the dating world and there's like, oh, well, there's no good guys. Well, actually there are, we just have to choose to see them, and there's always somebody. And it's just like that. It comes back to that awareness of like yourself and why you do certain things. Right. And so like, for me, what I discovered was that because I was living in such a fearful place, I realized that I was really fearful of abandonment, and that affected my interactions with the types of men that I chose to be in relationships with. And it affected our interaction to the point where I didn't know how to like have independence in a relationship, or I depended so much on that person for my happiness. And I was like very codependent. And I didn't understand a lot of that back then until my latest, like 2 years ago, when I had my, my last the last relationship where I wanted to marry this guy. And I realized like I wanted him back. I didn't want it to end. Right. And so this is when I really leaned more into coaching, actually. And I did some coaching programs, like how to get your ex back, like, and that's what really drove me into this career that I actually have right now. So I'm thankful for it, but I'm also thankful that I was able to move on from that relationship. But what really helped me move on was that it helped me understand my behavior. Was that when I started doing these coaching programs, one of the first steps that they say in getting your ex back is actually breaking off contact with your ex, right? And focusing on yourself and your personal development. And so because I was so focused and wanted this to happen, I started doing more coaching and focusing on myself and my personal development. And it ended up changing my life for the better in such a positive way. And it's a funny story because it's true. Like I literally bought probably 5 Get Your Ex Back programs. Like I could name all the coaches that are experts at Get Your Ex Back. And I think at some point, maybe this might've been embarrassing, but at now I'm I'm thankful for this story, because it brought me to the awareness that I was a very insecure person, had an insecure, anxious attachment style. Mm-hmm. And when I became aware of that and saw that it was just fear, and it was just the identity that I was carrying around with me at a subconscious level, I was able to change that and say, okay, now I have choice, right? Because now we have awareness, we have choice. Do I want to continue? This is why I'm choosing these guys. And this is why I have this conflict in my relationships. And this is why my life is externally. This is why. And when I had that epiphany, and I was able to now make choices like, okay, now I want to, transform my stories that I have around love, around men, around trust, insecurity, all these things that are affected by those attachment styles. And I'm not sure if you know about attachment styles.
I wouldn't say that I'm very aware. No, I wouldn't say that. Yeah. So anything you want to elucidate on it? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So there's this thing called attachment. There's this theory called attachment theory. And so when you're first born, you have an attachment to your caregiver. And however that relationship, progresses as you're a child, that affects how you operate in your love romantic attachments as you grow older. So if it's not a very secure type of relationship, or maybe you weren't very close, or maybe your parents weren't very close, there's a whole book on it, actually. It's called Attached. So if anyone wants to go and listen to that, it's an amazing book. I read it and it changed my life. So like, there was that first step of awareness, like, okay, well, now what do I do with it? Okay, so now I know that this is really affecting how I operate in relationships. Like I don't know how to give my partner space. I feel codependent. I don't know how to be independent. Like, and it really all comes back to just that fear of like, oh my God, they're going to leave me, right? So how do I change this? And I didn't even know that it was quite possible to change that until I started doing, until I had my own, went through the transformational coaching program. And that changed my life, because, you can use subconscious reprogramming for anything, right? I mean, you understand subconscious reprogramming, right? I'm sure you talk about it all the time. And I was able to use subconscious reprogramming to really change that identity of me being insecure to more secure. And that's exactly what I do in my program. So like, I help women who had similar, behaviors and patterns in their past, so they can choose better, and we can get out of victimhood, and we can make better choices, and we can be more independent and secure and happy in our relationships, right? Which is what, with less conflict, just like you're talking. That's why I think it's really great what you're doing here, because you're bringing awareness to conflict. Like, why do we have them? Why do we choose to have that in our relationships? Why do we choose to struggle in our relations? We don't have to, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, as you were speaking, I was thinking like the inverse of this is totally true on the male side of things too. Like, just because, I mean, we're human beings. We all have the same kind of like fundamental like base, in the sense of like, the stories that we create, where they come from, how our subconscious works and things like that. So I was just thinking from, a man's perspective of like, his experiences and like the stories that he would create around it, and like how taking that forward can impact, his relationships and things like that. So I definitely just wanted to call out that this is not like a gender specific thing. Like, this is a human being like experience.
Oh,
like,
no, not at all.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Cause I was just thinking like, I don't know, like I could just see, I only call that out that way just because like I have a sense that there's a large segment I'm in, I'll just say that might be like, it's a girl's thing. And I'm like, no, it's not, like I think it's just really important.
No, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, just because like,
yes.
Because it's really important to understand, like, just step back and think about what you just said. And like, as far as like where it came from and how those things got built. And if one were to just take a moment and just do a little self-reflection and see what their relationships were like, and be like, yeah, like I experienced this, and because of that, like I take it into like this next relationship. Like I remember in the episode that I just published today with Jason, I loved what he said about his, he's married a second time, and he said that he had to stop. And when his current wife would say something, if it sounded similar or triggered him based upon what his first wife said, he had to be like, okay, what is my current wife, what does she mean by that? Instead of like bringing that trigger and that story from his past into the now and being like, oh, like, and making it mean the same thing. And he's like, almost every single time she didn't mean, what
the same thing, right?
Yeah, the same thing. It wasn't the same experience. Yeah. Which reminds me of a quote that we're never in the same river twice, right? The waters are always flowing. So it's the exact same kind of thing, like where just because you've experienced something in the past, and it may feel similar to you in the now in a different relationship, doesn't mean it's the exact same thing. Like you have to, that awareness piece of just stopping and being like, okay, hold on a minute, and like allowing it to actually potentially mean something different or be something different, I think is really, that's a very small but very powerful thing to just do. That one thing can like open you up to like, not reliving your past, like you said, like why would we struggle, why would we choose to struggle? So yeah, if we've experienced pain in the past, to go forward, just allow ourselves to be open to the idea that it's very likely different of whatever we're experiencing, even though it may feel exactly the same. The reason it feels exactly the same is because we're making it mean that, like if we can be open to the possibility that, oh, it's actually something radically different because it's a new person, it's a new situation, even if it's with the same person, even if you're in like a marriage and you're experiencing the exact same thing, it's not always the exact same thing because it's an entirely different interaction, even though it feels like, even though you might be arguing about or experiencing the same conflict, it's a different moment,
Okay.
it's a different moment. So there's always the potential for it to be something new, something different. Yeah. So what you were talking about was, yeah, I definitely love that, and just wanted to call that out because I don't know. I just I've had resistance before working with men because I've always, and this is true, this is my own judgment on it, and it's been since like I've destroyed it, but my previous judgment was men are so thick, you know what I mean? Like they're just very static on some things where they develop their own system, and they see things and then they don't really want to change it. You know what I mean? They're just kind of like, yeah, that's just how it is. And it's like, yeah, like you gotta bend a little bit more than that. You gotta be open to like changing that, because really what it comes down to, and I found this out too through my different interviews so far, and I've had my own experience with this, and it's a little silly, I think, just to speak to the men, that we allow ourselves to not change until it reaches like a critical mass, like a really big pressure point or like something massive. Like, and it could be even as drastic as like the pain of death, like where something like, you might be almost had a heart attack, or I did have a heart attack and I almost died, and now I'm going to change. And it's kind of like, you don't have to let it get to that magnitude, like you can choose to change. Because I mean, that's the thing that I think is slightly silly, is that as men we'll allow ourselves to get to that particular, like that far, and then we'll be like, oh shit, all right, now I got to change. And it's kind of like, like if you're gonna change anyway, why the fuck do you have to let it get to that magnitude of like that? Why does it have to be that drastic? Like, can you just like maybe take
Because
a moment and reflect? Yeah.
I think a lot of that has to do with just men in general are very like in their masculine. Mm-hmm. If they're like a very masculine man, they have to be problem solvers, right?
Right.
And so if they think in their mind there's really no problem, then right. Why fix what's not broken, right?
Yes.
I think that's probably why, why change something if it's working? And pain is a blessing in a sense, because it really can indicate to you that something does need to be changed, so maybe and they have a problem to solve. Then they're like, oh, well, now I need to fix this or that, or just in general. I think sometimes we don't see that we need to change because we don't think we see a problem. We're like in our blind spots. And I think that's the great thing about having a coach. Mm-hmm. I've had many conversations with women who don't think they need coaching. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Everyone needs coaching.
Right. Yeah. Yep. That's true.
Everyone could use coaching in some way. Like, there's no way we're so perfect that we know every single thing. Like, there's, And the thing is I think for me, you know, as a relationship coach, I get that a lot, that like, I don't need coaching. I can figure it out on my own. Well, you can. It might you might have to go through more pain. Like you said, like, why wait? But you know, there always some blind spot that we have that can improve our happiness right now and our love right now, so that we can have that fulfilling relationship that doesn't have to lead to another divorce or make a better choice with you know, a partner or just whatever the case. Like, I totally get it. And I want to agree with you, like 100%, like men, the attachment styles affects them just as much. In fact, being somebody that used to be insecure attachment, I attracted a lot of insecure attachment men that felt the same, that didn't know how to give space and independence in the relationships. And when you become, it's so crazy, because when you become aware of it, you start to see it with other people. You're like, wow, that's amazing.
I definitely wanted to speak to that point too, about that you spoke to before, about as far as the masculine and men go, if it's not broke, don't fix it, kind of a thing. And if they don't see a problem, then why change? And I think that's completely accurate. So I guess my invitation to any men listening is to be like, well, if you have a conflict within your relationship, you know, and it seems to be like something that comes up fairly frequently, I would invite them to view that as a point of pain. It's not like going to kill you, no, but like it's a pain point, right? Any form of conflict I view as like not pleasurable. Now, if you're attached to the conflict or you enjoy conflict, that's another kind of a thing. But I think eventually you'll probably realize that you really don't enjoy the conflict, like, you know, or that it's not healthy. It's not really what you want. So in that regard, I would invite men to just be like, hey, when you're experiencing conflict within your relationship, just take that as a moment to reflect and kind of see how you can approach it differently, with a different kind of awareness to create a shift. You know, take that opportunity, take that as a micro heart attack, you know what I mean? like just because the thing is like, I've started calling it the Epcot Center of Resentment, right? These little things that like we tolerate and that we go through in our relationships, like, you know, these little fights, or the things that we end up tolerating or that we go through and we think that we've resolved them. You know, I view them as tiny little Lego pieces, because if we don't truly have awareness around them, or if we don't truly like pass through them to like an actual resolution, then they're just tiny little Lego pieces. And if after you do that like a million times, you and your partner have created the Epcot Center of Resentment, and you're going to go on the rides at the Epcot Center of Resentment, and everybody fucking hates those, and it ends up in divorce, it ends up in breakups, it ends up in whatever. Because once you start resenting your partner, and it happens on both sides of the equation, you're not going anywhere. And it makes it challenging to navigate your way out of that, because there's so much resentment on either side, that once person starts to talk and try to navigate towards a better resolution, it's hard for the other person to see and give space for that, because there's so much hurt and so much resentment and so much history with that. It makes it really challenging. So yeah, I would just say that for men, if you're going to experience conflict in your relationship, view that as an opportunity to save yourself from that type of death. You know, take that as an opportunity to look at it, and how can you change that? How can you flip that? Because I think there's awareness that men can get with and that's why I like to talk about the masculine and feminine energies, around understanding how principles work, like things. And I say principles because it's just like mathematics. Like, there's just ways that energies work between men and women, and how they're embodied, and we all have them. And once you get an awareness around that, it really alleviates some of this unnecessary conflict. Like, and instead of building the Epcot Center of Resentment, like, you can build, like, I don't know, I wanted to go like a completely probably inappropriate way, but you can have a lot more fun. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you can go and have a lot more fun than riding on the rides at Epcot Center of resentment.
No, I completely agree. I mean, and I've been there with that whole resentment thing, you know, in my marriages and in my relationships. It's hard to get over that if you don't. The thing about conflict that I really realized, and you know, goes back to what we were saying before, is that like really learning how to manage yourself, because resentment is something that it's inner, it's within you, right? You create that resentment within yourself. No matter, I mean, yes, we have no control over what other people say or do to us, but, and this is something that I really, you know, I emphasize in my program and teach, and I've actually created, I worked with a hypnotherapist to help me create a forgiveness audio, right? Because understanding, when you would start to understand what love is and what it means to actually love like yourself first, and then love, and what that means when you start to love yourself better, you start to love other people better and you have less conflict. And I guess why am I saying this is because we're talking about resentment, right? And that's something that's built within ourselves and we choose that, right? So like if we can really learn, like, and the thing that I see, you know, and that I used to do in my relationships was I had all this resentment for my ex-husband for a long time, right? And it goes back to that victim mentality where I would blame him for it. And I'd be like, you need to fix yourself. When in reality, I should be I should have been managing myself. I should have been practicing compassion for him and his mistakes and been like, okay, I can forgive you. I can forgive myself. Let me forgive. Let's just forgive, you know, and get in the habit of forgiveness and compassion, you know. And I think when you start to come from a different place and that within yourself, and you start to build those habits within yourself, it just naturally becomes easier when you work with other people, like in your relationships. Because the problem, what creates more conflict and builds that resentment is that we don't know how to self-manage ourselves. We don't know how to have forgiveness and compassion, instill kindness for somebody who just like made a mistake and is still learning and growing in their path, in their journey in life, right? And so we put all of our shit on them and then we make it worse. And then we just build this big old mountain full of resentment. And then it's like, how do you even, like you said, once you start building that, it's hard to really, and the only way sometimes for that to really dissipate and break down that is for two people. They try to go to marriage counseling and they're still at this place where they're at a head because they're focusing. And I see this with my kids. They're two kids. They fight, right? They fight and they're not making it about themselves and what they can do better and how they can focus on forgiveness or doing this. They're focused on the other person and all the things that person did wrong. Which creates them screaming at each other and yelling and blah, 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 right? And it's like how marriage is if we're not managing ourselves. So practicing that's so important to like understanding to just like take a step back and just like, you need to fix yourself. Just focus on you. So important.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I love the blame piece as well. I meant to speak to that earlier too. And I was actually thinking about that last night before I went to bed about, I was actually looking up this email. I guess I was in another program and it was where they talked about that. They said like effectively blaming somebody. Like they're like, if you're going to blame somebody for like the things in your life, then you need to effectively blame them for the things that they gave you too. Like, you know, like where I like how you said earlier in the conversation where like, you're very thankful for these kind of these opportunities to some of these conflicts because it gave you the chance to like see things or to be aware of things. And so I went through, you know, this program and I wrote my ex-wife this email and I was trying to find it because I was going to read it again just to like remember what I had told her. But yeah, it sounds a little bit of an oxymoron to effectively blame somebody, but the idea is to basically like thank them. And because there's all of these things that if you're going to blame them for something, like there's opportunities for your growth there. There's something for you there other than the poison that you are drinking with the resentment, or like there's a flip side of it. There's always a duality. There's a flip side of that coin. And I just remember for sure, I remember my first interaction with my ex-wife after I sent her that, and it was markedly different, like her energy. So it was received well, is what I'm trying to say. So it was an interesting exercise because I hadn't thought about doing that prior to that event, and so it stuck with me where I'm like, yeah, like it sounds, when we're emotionally charged, it sounds like kind of like bullshit to be like, why should I be thankful for kind of like the feelings I'm feeling? But then it comes back to that ownership, like you got to take ownership of those feelings and like understand that that other person may have brought that up in you, but that's inside of you. And now you have the opportunity to become aware at a deeper level of yourself and to like not experience that again, because once you work on that, once you figure out what inspired that inside of you, where that really came from, that person gave you the opportunity to do that. Like you might want to like totally fucking blame them. I've been there. But really they just gave you this giant gift. And in the moment, I can understand that you may not want to think of it that way. But the truth of it is like, that's a real thing. It's a real thing. Yeah. They did give you the opportunity to grow. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I look at every relationship as a reflection of me, including, every relationship, my children. I'm constantly, when I look at them and I see the things that they do, I'm like, okay, that's a reflection off of me. Even if they do bad, when they do bad, I'm like, oh, wow, I need to fix myself. Like I'm doing that because they're doing it. Like they're just copycatting me. Right. So I know, like, even, as I've really been doing a lot of this, like, work, almost every relationship that I've had conflict in has improved drastically. Now that I've taken the inner step to forgive and to look inner at my own stories around, like you said, the interpretation and meaning I'm giving them, doing forgiveness, working with subconscious reprogramming and, managing my energy and where I give my energy. It's just changed every relationship that I have, from my mom, my dad, my brothers and my sisters, my friends. Oh my God, even my ex partners that I share children with. Those relationships, I would say like a year and a half ago, were filled with so much conflict. And I just had a conversation yesterday with my ex-husband, and it was beautiful. Like I was telling him, thank you. And we've had our fair share of conflict. And like you said, like, oh my gosh, we have fought a lot over the past, like prior, we were fighting over this. Like, it's like, what are we fighting about? Like, now that I've really healed a lot of stuff within me, I just feel thankful for him and anything he gives. And I'm always constantly telling him that. And to be able to do that in my relationships with somebody that I once blamed everything for, it's amazing. To have that type of like freedom and that love. When you, like I said, when you start to understand, what love really means, because we get this idea of what love means, and it's all these things that you're talking about. People say, oh, I want to be in a relationship because I want love. Or it's like, well, do you really know what it means? Let's go down to the definition of love, because when we really truly love ourselves, we would want to create less conflict in our life. We would want to protect our energy. We want to protect ourselves. Not in the sense that we want to block everyone out. We want to put walls up. No, we just treat ourselves better. And when we treat ourselves good and we treat other people good, it changes everything. With, like you said, when we flip that story of gratitude instead of like resentment, that can change somebody's life so much. Just that one habit right there.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting too when you start to look at when we start to look at ourselves, like how critical we are of ourselves, and like that forgiveness piece is definitely key to like have compassion and forgiveness for yourself, and like how just doing that, it sounds like it should be something so natural and so easy, and something that we shouldn't even have to like work at, right? Like, oh, like of course I love myself. And it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, like that's a very multifaceted and deep kind of a thing. And you might love pieces of yourself, but like, do you love all of yourself? Like that's what the shadow work is, and like all of that kind of stuff, like the dark sides of you, and like the things that you might feel kind of shitty about, like, because everybody's got that stuff. So like, do you love that? And it's kind of like, well, no. And it's like, well, if you don't, like, you're not going to love it in somebody else either. You're not going to let them have that either. You'll hold that against them because you're holding it against yourself, like,
Yeah.
yeah. And so that, I mean, that's the thing, is like, even though it sounds so easy, at least it sounded easy to me too. Like, oh, of course I love myself. Then I'm like, there was a whole lot of stuff I didn't, and I'm sure there's still pieces of me that I'm not like aware of, that I'm kind of like cringy about, where I'm like,
You're
yeah,
like, okay, I'm not going to share that.
I don't know about that piece. Like, yeah. So
it's crazy. Yeah, it is. It's so, I mean, I see people say it all the time. Like, oh, I love myself. And I promise, I like 2 years ago, didn't even know what the action meant.
Mm-hmm.
I could, here I was like wanting relationships, and I was, I wanted relationships. I wanted love, all these things 2 years ago, but I didn't even know what it meant.
Yeah.
And it's exactly what you're talking about, loving even the bad parts about you. And, it didn't even come to my realization until like this past year that the one part of me that I didn't even love about myself, for me, was being a mom.
Yeah. Yeah.
I ran from this for, oh my gosh, like not accepting myself as a mother was like, it's so simple, because it is a part. And a lot of moms are like, oh, I'm so proud to be a mom. I'm a mom, but like, and it doesn't even seem that dark, does it? But like truly inside, until I started doing more reflection and that awareness on my stories and myself, did I notice that I really didn't like myself as a mother. And I struggled in so many ways in my relationship with my children because of it. And even my own mom, really.
That's really powerful, Deidra. Thanks for that. Because I think a lot of women, if they were to be honest with themselves that are moms, could probably totally relate to that. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, that's a very powerful share, I think. Absolutely. I just want to honor that, because that's vulnerable. And I think that, I don't know, that struck me. And I think too, like, just because I feel like there's a lot of women that can relate to that, just to have compassion for that piece of a woman, like, like if you think back to like your own mom, or like anybody that's listening, if you think back to your own mom, if she at all felt like that, I mean, how many people are going to share that, or admit that? And exactly what you said, how that's going to impact your relationship with your children or anybody, in a way. But yeah, that's a big piece, because I think a lot of people, I mean, it's totally portrayed in our society, like most, if you're a mom, like, oh, you love it, like, and all this, and it's kind of like, yeah, you may not, or you may love being a mom, but you may not love pieces of yourself of how you show up as a mom, or like whatever. I don't know, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like that in and of itself is a very big piece that is multifaceted and has a lot of layers to it, because there's a lot that goes into being a mom, and yeah, thank you. There's a lot to think about on that one.
I mean, I didn't even really realize it was a problem until I went back out into the dating world, and it was the one piece of myself that I didn't want to share with somebody. And see, so like, I didn't know it was a problem. And when I started meeting, potential partners that I could, have a relationship with, and I didn't want to share the one thing that should be that should make me happy or proud or whatever. And that I was like actually trying to hide it. I don't know why. And then I had a conversation with my mom, actually. And I realized a lot of the stories weren't even mine. They were my mom's. Like you were just talking about, like when I started to reflect, I was like, and I started to listen a little bit more and just listen to my mom, tell me, just asking questions like, Mom, what do you think about that? She would just talk and I would just listen. I'm like, that is not me. And we go, about subconscious identity here. And so recognizing that that's all those, like, I don't like being a mother. I don't accept myself. Nobody will accept me as a mother, made me shameful of that. And when I started to recognize that, I realized those weren't my stories. Those were my mom's stories, actually. Like, cause you just said, like we, and so like from there doing that awareness. And that's when I started working with the hypnotherapist, and she helped me reframe and change those stories that I thought about myself. And now that's why I'm actually here and I'm able to share this with you, because it changed my relationship with my mom, and then it changed my relationship with my children, and then, the men that I meet, that I have met, and me being more open about who I am. And it's just created just more of like a positive experience for me now that I'm open about it and I share it. And it's something that I talk about, with the women in my program as well, like loving all of you. So
Yeah.
thank you for allowing me to share that.
No, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I think that was a really, I don't know, it felt very powerful to me to have you share that. So thank you for that. So, well, I guess we're probably going to wrap it up for the sake of time, but I definitely want to give you a chance to talk about your program a little bit and where people can find more about you and everything like that. Because I know you've got your program coming up here in just a little bit. So please feel free to speak to whatever you'd like to about all of that.
Thank you, Zach, for allowing me to share this. Yes, I will be launching a masterclass in June, and I will be launching a masterclass workshop where I will be helping women gain a better understanding of how they can date without their past. So like, how can we get back into relationships without our past? Because a lot of the time we carry our past, not really knowing how we're carrying some of the things into our next relationship, right? So since my mission is really to help women attract, the man that they want to spend the rest of their life with, and like that idea of the man of their dreams, which is, finding that man without fear, right? We talked about fear. So like, how can we get rid of that fear until we can be in relationships with more love and more fulfilled happiness? So I will be doing a masterclass in that, and I will be launching my next group program, my next 3-month program, where I help women to attract their dream partner. So that's what I will be doing. And you can find me on Instagram at Your Last Relationship Coach. I have a Facebook group, Manifest Love, where I will be talking more about these elements that I use in my program, so you can help gain a better understanding on how you can use like online dating to help you find that. Because a lot of women are they don't like online dating. So I'm really it's just,
yeah,
it's the norm, but how do you find a partner when the norm is online dating, but you don't want to do online dating? It's like a very, there's a lot of ways to look at that, and how can we change and reframe those stories that we have around that. Right? So that's what I teach, and that's what I help women overcome, those stories, and help make online dating fun, or just dating and relationships fun again, which is what life should be. It should be enjoyable without less conflict, like you said. It should be fun. And so that's what I help women bring more fun into their life and enjoy it, enjoy meeting people, and enjoy connecting and building connection. So
awesome.
I think you will have the link to the registration for my masterclass.
Yes, I will definitely post that in the description in my YouTube video, and then I'll have it on my bio page as well on my Instagram. So yeah, the people have a variety of different ways to find that for you.
Yay! I'm really excited. I'm excited about your podcast. I love listening to your podcast. I think I think you being, having that masculine, you being, how do I phrase this? I guess you being male and being like talking about conflict and how can we improve relationships. I think it's so important to so many men. I think it's so important. So I think you're doing a great thing here,
Awesome.
talking about it.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks, Deidra. Thanks for being a guest.
Your knockout punch for today is that, as you've seen through other interviews, starting with ourselves is where it begins. We all have choice, which is a big piece of the knockout punch today. Choice. Taking responsibility and understanding where we're coming from, how we're co-creating, how we are creating our lives. The blame that we choose to put on others when it's really just an opportunity to look inside and to choose to see what's really going on inside of us, to manifest what we're experiencing on the outside of us. So that's really the knockout punch for today. Choice and responsibility, and starting with ourselves. Till next time. All right, that wraps up today's episode of the Real Zack Olinger. Thanks again for listening. If you happen to find this episode insightful or valuable, I invite you to pass it along to somebody else, because chances are, if you found it valuable, they will too. If you're on Instagram, you can find me at The Real Zack Olinger. Until next time, everybody. Thanks for listening.